Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the VC Deck Breakdown hosted by Cremon Digital Hub. I'm Darren, your host for the day. I lead up the community here at CDH. For those of us joining us who don't know about what CDH does, CDH is a space where we connect innovation with companies, and we do that by connecting our ecosystem with lots of events that support innovation. Currently, we have a bit of a focus around founders, VCs, and the like. We're really, really glad today to be joined by Hugh Stevens of Galileo Ventures. Hugh's a ex and actually a current founder of Scared Social. So he's done some cool things in as a founder and as VC. Currently, he's the co-founder and the partner at Galileo Ventures. But yes, one of the really cool ways that we help support the ecosystem and help founders learn and grow their businesses is by doing the VC deck breakdown, so people can get some really cool insights into how a VC is thinking when they're looking at your deck and you're looking into a potential investment. So without further ado, I'll leave it to Hugh to introduce himself and open up the deck so we can get started today. Okay, thank you.
Howdy. Thanks for the intro. Yeah, great to see everyone. As I think I said, or as Darren's already mentioned, directionally, the idea of this is really to kind of give a bit of train of thought. So, you're definitely going to see situations where I will misunderstand something and then discover I got it totally wrong as I go through the deck and things like that. And that's, what we tell our founders is, kind of what to, expect through this iteration process is really like, as with all of these sort of things, if anyone here has had the horrors of doing a PhD or an honours thesis or something, sometimes when you spend so much of your time in one document, you can get very much easily sort of blindsided into exactly what people do. So as an intro to me, I run Galileo Ventures with James Alexander, who's up in Sydney. So we sit across Sydney and Melbourne and have a partner who splits her time across the US and Australia as well. And we're a pre-seed fund. Fund 2 is about to finally had our bank accounts closed, open, sorry, you know what I mean? Fund 2 is just about to start investing. First deals are lined up, which is really exciting. So we generally write between $200,000 and $500,000 checks. Early stage companies, not afraid of being really early. In fact, we're commonly the first check or even, the only person. We once did a deal pre-incorporation, as I always say. My background's in management consulting, and then obviously, as you mentioned, done some SaaS and things. So without further ado, let's crack on. I will share my screen and hopefully it will work. The classic technical problems. There we go. So I bet you can see that. Is there a single view thing? Okay, perfect. Hope you can see that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through each of these three decks and just kind of talk through my thinking. I haven't seen them. Just saw them, just got sent them a second ago. So the idea is to be totally fresh, as if it's what we would do when we get a deck by email, something like that. And those who have attended before will have heard probably some of the things I no doubt will probably bring up again. But we'll see what each one brings.
Oh, so, good. We only have 2 decks today, so you can spend a little bit more time on.
I've got more time for once. Excellent.
On each of them, yeah.
Perfect. So this is what happens, and I haven't even seen that there are only 2 decks, or I probably Darren told me in the email. I just forgot. Great. Okay, that means I can be more patient. Okay, so first one, Monad. I like it. It's got a bit texture gradient. I don't know, visuals design. I don't know, but that's what I call a point of religion. In other words, something that is very subjective / unable to be proven. Or we'll see what happens in 20 years. Okay, so. Those who've seen this before, I like the little summary of what you do on the first page. Helps a lot. So AI infrastructure, software plus hardware system. That seems like a lot. That's when I first read. Enables frontier AI models to run efficient and commodity tied electric. Okay, cool. So this to me says it's a bit like what's it, the Sydney company. The name will come to me in due course. Okay, so we're looking at infrastructure. This immediately then says to me the piece of, are we looking at commodity on inference, on training, on blah. So we'll hopefully find out more about this as we go. But directionally, I get it. AI, we're doing software plus hardware. What are we doing? It's going to be like a CUDA equivalent. Let's find out. Okay, so yes. Okay, so this is problem side. Like problem side makes it clear. I think the So going through the thing here, I like when I read the first sentence, I go to myself, that's kind of true, but not within the, not within the larger space. Certainly, I know a number of customers that have on-prem stuff, and then you said the regulated SMEs, and I go, oh, okay, fair, yes, that is probably true. And I think that's, again, I could kind of see the solution. I sort of immediately, see the problem. I sort of immediately think in the sense of like, how much of this problem that you've described in the slide here is a near-term versus a long-term problem. It's kind of my initial thoughts, but let's see what the solution piece is. On-device inference exists hardware, sure. So this is kind of what people are doing with the smaller Grok models and things like that on Mac Minis. That's why they will keep getting sold out. Software solution, it's an interesting approach, yeah. And a hardware acceleration option. Okay, so this is a bit like the NVIDIA eGPU type stuff. It's kind of what this is saying to me so far. Not a world that I know tons about. Beyond, I know several people that spend a lot of their time fiddling with it. So team slide. Obadiah, aerospace. Okay, interesting to go from aerospace into this world. Not a surprising one. Okay, so presumably technical. Senior quant scientist is an interesting one. Quantitative engineer. Ooh, okay, that's I know quantity surveyors and things, but not that. Okay, so technical part-time, and Dr. Hidari. Sorry if I pronounce things wrong. Advisor. Okay, so on these ones, I think it's always better to split out the advisory stuff, the advisor people from the core people, if that makes sense. It might be the sort of thing of where someone's an advisor who's going to join full-time or something, in which case it's kind of a weird mix. But as ever you see, it's always helpful to sort of more easily be able to split things out. So like the way the card layout's designed a little bit here doesn't make it as easy for me to sort of read that when I'm flicking through it like this at some sort of pace. But yeah, okay. So we've got, clearly a technical full-time person and then 2 part-times at the moment. To be able to, I presume that then says to me, it's really early stage company. So it's kind of in terms of the meat of, does this fit staging for us? Yes, it's clearly an early stage company. Research partner. Okay, so we'll do inference engine, strategic R&D. Okay, yeah. I know. I vaguely know the Unimel group there. Okay, so there's an ARC grant here. Okay, that's interesting. The question I guess I have here immediately is to say, when you say eligible and then describe them, are you talking about what those grant, like I know what an ARC grant is, but it's like, this is what we're thinking of applying for? Or is that this is what we could potentially become eligible for? So that's probably something to make a bit more clear in the copy. Now this is a very interesting way to display a comparison. I don't hate it, but it immediately does confuse me. Actually, like the graph mathematical person in me quite likes this, but it does immediately confuse me compared to what I'm used to seeing, which is the tick cross comparison chart piece, or the 2x2, of course, which is the classic. So sometimes inventing sometimes doing these things in a way that's different can be really interesting, but in other ways it can be be a bit harder to read. You've also cropped an M, that might be just the PDFification of it. So the part that this doesn't really make as clear to me as I would like is really like, what's the really big, like, what's the really big key thing? And that doesn't, like, I'm still missing a little bit here so far. I'm with 6 slides in. Missing a little bit here of like, and this is a comms thing. My caveat is I got my wisdom teeth out 2 weeks ago as well, so my brain is not necessarily always firing on full cylinders. But trying to kind of work out what is kind of that key. What's that sort of like the one key thing? And like, I think there's an element here of where clearly it's a piece of, we're trying to drive cost reduction to enable SME usage within regulated spaces. That's a good clear sort of value prop piece. But the part that I haven't quite understood is how your solution hits the road. Maybe the solution side just hasn't quite landed with me in my head yet, of like, what exactly have you unlocked that changes it? And it can be tricky, I think, with some of these more sort of deeper tech, patented kind of things, because obviously you kind of want to go into some detail, but you don't want tons of scientific detail, nor do you necessarily want to sort of, disclose things that are potentially, commercial in confidence or similar. And so don't send VCs NDAs, that doesn't help. But sort of having a bit of a more grounding, I guess, in my mind, I'm still a little bit like, okay, so I'm understanding the problem space pretty well here, but not as much about how you're going about the solve, and then what that means for what makes things very different. Okay, this is also a good use case, right? This is another use case. This is a novel applications that is very sciencey, but this is the sort of like, is this V0 customer? I don't know. This could be a really good V0 customer of people who are on site or strategic or like defense type areas. That could be a really easy thing of saying, hey, this is our initial wedge to the market. If this could be a thing in 10 years. Yeah, that's a different story. But like I said, it's not as clear to me with just the slide as to whether you're seeing this as this is our number one or this is like number 10. So that sort of is maybe an interesting one. Market sizing. Everyone will have heard me rant about market sizing. So I like market sizing in thinking about, I like the way that you've put in here how you've kind of come to the numbers. So I kind of like that idea. I kind of like the idea of being quite clear here, and like it's a good summary, whether it needs to be in the big text, it could be little text, but the sort of justification of where you come from the numbers really helps a lot to understand how you have come up with them. I think the thing that I'm curious about here is like the market size here from a bottom up. We're going to do a top down in a second. No, we're not. Okay, so and then I'll come in a second. So the market size from a bottom up here thing is sort of like, oh yes, I can kind of see yes, let's take everyone who has computers and then go upwards. But I sort of want to see, as I sort of have said to these in the past, is kind of the two horizons we really think about in venture is kind of like what happens this round, right? It's got 12 to 18 months. And then what do things kind of look like in 10 years? And the time between is kind of not immaterial, but hard to, really forecast or anything like that, particularly if you're really early. And so kind of for market, I guess what I really want to understand that I haven't quite doesn't quite come across from this slide is the piece of like, what is that in the first 12 months? Where do you think that leads you to in terms of your obtainable market, as you're calling here, like, sales, right? And where do you think that leads to in a big term horizon? Because the two things that this says to me is, okay, near term, you think you can do 220K in SaaS sales. Okay, we'll do the math on the pricing table we're about to see just next as to what you think that means in terms of acquisition. And then if in 10, I'll call it 10-ish years, 9 years, you're thinking you're going to be doing 18, that seems not enough. That sounds, I know, a bit silly and crazy. But in terms of, meeting that second piece for me as is this something that I should jump on a call with? It's like, if the kind of the 10-year vision piece is this company's turning over 18 million, great business, but probably not a venture scale business. And that's something that then means doesn't fit with our model because, like it's that whole sort of, we have to go for home runs thing of venture. So let's do some of the math here. Lifetime is 2 years. That's an interesting piece. It's okay. I like this, and then we've said why we've done that. I hate lifetime pricing in SaaS. That's because I run a SaaS company, and you realize quite quickly that lifetime customers are terrible. But I like but simple. Okay, so we're doing true bottoms up SaaS here. Like we're doing like seeded Salesforce SMB type pricing, which is interesting. Is how I kind of look at that. It's always tricky when you're early on is to sort of have both a PLG and an SLG go to market strategy. Generally speaking, while this might be the future state, it's sort of like what I want to know as well in here. This could be the next slide. We might be about to have the classic moment. Is like, are you starting with this enterprise tier of sales later? Or are you starting with the bottoms up tier? Because it's very hard to do both. Very, very hard. I assume this is probably something that. Oh no, wait a minute. Different thing. Confuses me, these two combinations. I assume this is because we're trying to highlight this piece. Or maybe it's out of a sales deck or something. But I'm guessing then the idea is we're going to lead with the sales-led growth. And this could be the kind of thing of where it's a slide deck that's designed to be presented to, and you explain that. But like when I'm reading through it, if I've just read it purely, I go, okay, we've got those 2 extra points. What's this meant to actually say? So financial projections, great. Okay, again, point of religion, I guess, as to whether or not how much founders can really do that. So this is where it's confusing here, right? So 2035 earnings is different to what you think the obtainable market is over here, which is confusing, right? So there's some math here that isn't matching in my head, along with this, right? So that's where I guess there's something that's not quite. Maybe there's been a series of updates on how you've done this math to then work this out, but that's not immediately clear to me. The EBIT size and things like that. I mean, again, it's nice to have these sort of things and think about them, and it's good to see. This says to me the opposite of what we said earlier in saying, hey, like, what does it actually look like in terms of does it fit that mandate of is this going to be a really big business? This says to me you're seeking and you're thinking of it as it ends up being a big business in 10 years. And this one says to me that you're not. So there's a mismatch there in what the two things are saying. That might be that the hardware layer is coming in and stuff like that. Sure. But like that hasn't been obvious to me yet. And there you go. Now we're about to find out more about the hardware. So that's nice. It's wonderful to be able to discover this. Okay, so we have a portfolio company that bought one of these, coming with a brand, one of those like 60K US equivalents. So I understand kind of the demand for it. And the pre-configured thing. I know there's a handful of people that do it. That makes sense. Interesting price points. Reminds a bit of, is it Tiny Computer? That is seeking to do a similar thing with kind of at a similar sort of price point scale. So interesting. Storage accelerator card. Okay, so we're sort of doing is this RAM disks? Is that what we're doing? I don't know. We're doing RAM disks. Is it? See, this is the next part. Then, as I go, what is a storage accelerator card to you? Like, I'm technical enough to know what a RAM disk is, at least from the old days. But like, what does that actually mean? And I think that's where you've got to try and explain a little bit more of this. This piece, yeah, makes sense to me. Again, like I've done math off the back, done math using RAM disks and things before. So like I kind of understand that bit, but like I want to sort of know a little bit more about sort of what the underlying technical piece is and how much of this is kind of repurposing existing hardware or being able to kind of use that versus incrementally new hardware, and you're going to build a whole supply chain. Because this one obviously is presumably I get parts off the shelf, stick them all in, run a drive image. Great, cool. And this one is presumably something that is tied back to your IP. So it's software and hardware at the start. But kind of give me a bit more context as to what that means. Might be about to find out. Okay, now we're in financial projects. Okay, so this is how it is that we've somehow made the math work earlier, right? So that's where the ordering of this hasn't quite, made sense to me in my head. And we're now at slide 14, so it's already quite long for a slide deck that I would be reading to. So some of the stuff that I've sort of said, this doesn't all make sense, might be good for an appendix instead, right? So that I can get the early part of this one of the like, hey, we want to get really big. And, this could just be a breakdown of what percentage is hardware versus software across these different horizons. Would be a simple way to do it. But like we're now doing this. Okay, again, good use of showing your assumptions. I really like I really like people who show their thinking here. It's interesting question. Again, the point of, never know how good these things are. Lots of fiction written in Excel for everyone. I've done it too. And yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there's kind of an interesting sort of thematic that's coming across in my head here of like, you're asking this question of what is the future of private hardware? Right? And that's kind of the big religious question that this seems to really be asking of like, we look at, MacBook Neos and stuff like that and sort of this sort of, I guess, almost going back towards thin client computing world type stuff. And how does that really map to the future of computing, in cloud, quote unquote, but also in AI? And it's an interesting question, right? And I think I'd consider sort of like unpacking, or certainly, one of the things that I'd need to do and think about myself is really like, where do we as a fund think that is all going? Because there is an interesting question there of then, particularly if we're saying we're carving off the smaller size business market. Now, SME can be pretty big category. So I think it could also help back when we're talking about our market piece here, and I'm flicking around a little bit because I have a bit more time, so I'm able to do it. We're talking about our sort of, market here. Some examples of these customers look like this. Like I'm assuming this is like financial advisor and things like that, but I don't really know. So I think that would also help understand a bit more about where you're seeing which part of SMB you think. Because there's also like this financial advisor little and this financial advisor big, but like, can I see an individual consultant running their own AI stack? Or maybe if they're deeply technical, maybe if they're doing a lot of defense work or some computing type stuff. But like less so if there's like a solo financial advisor, so where does regulated industry, what does regulated industry mean to you, and all sorts of stuff. Like healthcare is another interesting one of where like obviously in healthcare we already have a lot of health professionals, rightly or wrongly, using cloud-based models in either a hybrid or a public cloud context. And so what does that really mean, and blah blah, blah and everything else. But I know from my experience in healthcare that there's been a big shift out of the old days of healthcare, where GP clinics would all have a Windows 2000 server sitting in a cupboard that would run all of their electronic records. Now they've all finally accepted the reality of quote unquote cloud. And so there's that sort of question of which markets are we really talking about here with an SMB. That then I have to sort of then put that layer of thinking on top of it. What does computing look like in the future for that audience? Which is again an interesting question. Scaling strategy. Sure, we're going to do an OEM. We can do a channel partner model, and the same. Yep. And yeah. Okay. Sure. Makes sense. Again, since it's the sort of thing of where I would say this is what I want to know is the piece of where you think this is going to be early on and where it's going to be late on. Yeah, late on. This is how things are bought and sold. Definitely. But then which one comes first, and how you're sort of seeing the part that comes first is often a better piece. And like so far, I haven't quite gotten I don't know if I've missed the dates, but I haven't quite gotten the timeline of how you're thinking about these things yet, right? So like there's also a piece here of where, like where does this timeline work out of? When are we doing the hardware piece? When are we doing the software piece? How does that look in terms of timeline? Which I could probably back it out by looking at these assumptions and then mathing out these assumptions and the earlier assumptions, but kind of make it easy for me. Maybe there'll be another slide about it. Okay, so let's have a look at the okay, so this is interesting. Okay, so one of our customers is childcare centers. Okay. Oh, okay. Which is an interesting one. We like a public Reddit. Good to order a clip. So I think this is an interesting. It's okay. So this is interesting, right? And I go, okay, it's an interesting question. Like again, should these things be done? You look at there was that school and that attendance taking company that went through StartNet years and years and years ago, that was doing an NVIDIA based on-prem camera type solution, rightly or wrongly. So interesting, but interesting to see. I know I'm getting more color about how you're seeing the early customer base, right? And now you can sort of see the mindset starting to develop. Cool. This one has really helped me a lot. You've talked to a PCB dev company. Cool. That makes sense. You're not going to build your own PCBs if you can avoid it. The good part of this, the good thing this says to me is that you're not going to try and reinvent the wheel of like learning to try and. It's like there's a reason that all of the lab equipment people all use industrial design specialists rather than having their own how. Like you're not trying to relearn the lessons that everyone else has already learned. It is the kind of good part. But yeah, I don't know if it necessarily really adds a lot of flavor, because I would say, well, yes, obviously. I say yeah, they are. Okay, so proof of concept shows ascend PC. Now, which ascend PC is which one? See, now it doesn't. The name doesn't make sense because I haven't seen the name anywhere. So is that just the brand name of the PC? Maybe that's your Dell. Sure, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, so again, name that doesn't make sense to me, doesn't fit with any of the stuff that I've seen here. And then this part says to me, okay, so we're doing this sort of, I'm going to call it a RAM disk because I'm assuming it's a RAM disk at this point. This is again where I can be totally wrong. But RAM disk like thing. with the workstation piece and the software piece. So and again, I'm also interested to see here about what's interesting to me now is going this piece of, okay, so you sort of, it's starting to feel a little boil the ocean of like, we've got this layer of saying we're going to have this software accelerated piece that's going to allow sort of commoditized hardware, but then also you want to couple it with hardware to be able to make it work. And I kind of go, oh, like that seems like a lot to be able to do. Again, long-term, short-term problem. But I'm kind of, that part this slide doesn't quite explain to me like what this really is, if that makes sense. And I mean that in the sense of like how, like, what does sort of proof of concept mean to you here of like, it does this or it can do this. We've shown that for X dollars worth of commodity hardware, we can get Y result. Like that part of what POC means, it hasn't necessarily like come across. Because this part to me is sort of like, again, it's a good way of describing what we've just seen in the previous slides, but doesn't necessarily like tell me what the proof of concept piece is. Cool. So now if I read this in detail, I might be able to work out what the actual thing is. But okay, we've got some patent pieces done. That's an IP thing that I'll have to deal with in DD and think about. Again, it's a complicated question as to how some of this is, particularly software solutions, is patentable, but software plus hardware more doable. Use of funds, love a pie chart. Use of funds, nice, simple, easy. Good to see that we're putting it mostly on R&D, 50-ish% on R&D, 11% on CapEx. Okay, yeah, that seems roughly right. In terms of the pie chart, so I've read the pie chart before I even looked at the number. Raising 3.8, yeah, it doesn't seem totally ridiculous. It feels like an aggressive approach for what is currently a solo founder with some part-time people on it, but not out of there in terms of deep techie stuff. Again, I think that's where I need to really understand how you're seeing that piece of where the next 12 to 18 months go. 3 years runway is a lot of runway at the moment. So I think a lot of people would say 3 years is a lot. 4 on 14, I presume you're trying to do 2 on 10, but 2 US on 10 US and trying to translate it to Australian, which makes a little bit of sense. But 3 years of runway is probably abnormal at the moment in what we're seeing in market. It's normal in the deep tech hardware sense, but abnormal in the software sense. So that's where I sort of, again, that what does the timeline look like in the horizons piece then comes back to whether or not this ask really makes sense. But good, clear description of where you're seeing valuation being. Safe versus priced is my problem, I would say, more so than yours. Safe is a nice thing, for sure, but can be messy. But you having an idea of where you think the company should land is a good thing, and obviously seeing a good breakdown. And that the pie chart to me here explains very clearly the piece and simply the piece of where you're thinking the dollar's going to get spent. So I think that's good slide in that context. I'm not able to see the chat stuff. I'll come back to that. Okay, so that's it. So now, what's missing here? We need the slide at the end. That's the context slide. I know that it's also at the start, but it's nice to have the little slide at the end. It's the context slide, but a good deck, an interesting deck, and like I said, it's a lot of that thing of it's really hard, I think, for deeper tech companies to really try and get their point across because you often don't really know how well how technical the other person is in the first place, but also how well they do it. We've looked at various like electron microscopy techniques and things like that, and my knowledge of electron microscopy and things like that is negligible, and so I think it can be really hard to settle. And you can probably see hopefully some of the confusion that can come through here from my lens of trying to work out the piece of how I try and make it fit within what I understand. So it can be really tricky as a founder to be able to explain these kinds of companies. And yeah, I think probably just some of those things of just like the timeline piece here, I think is the key missing part for me in really understanding how this works. And like the other part I should say while I'm here is the other part missing here is where we get. So in 3 years, where are we going to be? A mature and competitive product in market, like is this the software piece, is the hardware piece, like that element. So I think that's probably the other feedback. But nice, simple. You'll notice, like I said, the design pieces, I don't think design is really that important, but feed it to Claude Design if you want to change it. But nice, and a lot of those problems nice and simple. Some of them probably need a bit more explanation / massaging. Like I think probably spend a lot of time on the financial side of this one in the deck in a way that I'd actually be exploring the solution in a bit more detail of when you're a deep tech person, of like what we've kind of done to date, how we've done it. Like I'd probably spend some more time on that for me to understand that context better. And then the financial thing, if you think about it as a VC, and again, appendix / things that you can pull up when we're on a call or something is always helpful. But as a VC, I sort of want to be able to understand that piece of, are you thinking big or are you thinking less big? And that's what the finance piece should really tell me. And like, what are the dynamics of this market, and what are these markets? We saw the childcare thing kind of coming up later. I was like, oh, childcare. Okay, that makes more sense. I hadn't even thought of that as a sector earlier on. And so, that part I think is, you can probably take some focus away from that, and give me a bit more context about the solution. So I'll click the chat finally and be able to see the question. There are questions.
There wasn't that many questions. There was just one question
I can't
about
see it. Cool.
18 million users.
18 million users.
But I do know that the founder Obi had to hop off to another meeting at 12:30,
okay.
so he's probably already.
Well, that's right. Normally we will encourage them to ask and answer questions.
Yeah.
But welcome to send me an email and ask me any questions about other things. So in which case, I'll head on to the next one. Look at that. I'm always on time too.
So on time.
So number 2, spatiotemporal, missing intelligences, robotics and AI. Okay, so very empty slide. Good and bad. I don't know. Missing intelligence for robotics and AI doesn't quite tell me, like it tells me you're doing robotics and AI. Doesn't quite tell me the solution yet. So you're sort of like, I'd almost say it needs a little bit more context to be able to, like I said, from the start of it, it's always really helpful for you to sort of go, oh, okay, this kind of fits vaguely into this bucket, or this is what we're really trying to achieve. So give me a little bit more, I think, on that first slide would be helpful. Okay. Oh, problem slide, detailed problem slide. Okay, so yeah. Okay, yes. Okay, yes. Second problem slide, lots of text, right? So again, give me a good and a bad thing. Models. Okay, so problem. Okay, we're not on the solution. So then we go to the sort of solution piece, I think. Yes. Very detailed problem slide. I think you could easily probably work out a way to summarize, bring this into one. I think you put a lot of detail in here to try and get the piece of what this is. My kind of, this kind of piece of the, hey, as children we can perceive, understand, act. It's really hard for us to teach robots to do that. Sure. But I think it's sort of like 2 slides provides a lot of detail and context where 1 probably is enough. So I'd work out how to try and maybe merge them a little bit. But let's go and have a look at the solution. So, spatiotemporal. Okay. I mean, we're sort of getting into we're getting into philosophies of robots is what I'd say in some ways. I don't mind that. It's interesting. And I'm curious now as to how you see your product fitting within this, which I hope is the next slide. But I think you've done, again, like now I think I have an understanding a little bit of like how you're trying to combine this concept of it, which is an interesting concept. Kind of, again, this part does help a little bit in grounding it. Probably too long, but let's have a look. Oh, okay, now we're on the first piece. Okay, so this piece is more interesting, right? So now again, this is the kind of element of where early on I think would have helped some piece of like, we're trying to translate the job of the business, from my view, is to translate initially motion, but presumably other things, and then we're going to be able to do that. Now it's interesting here in looking at this, and again, one of the things I'm now thinking about is like, how is this fitting into, obviously, you look at the self-driving car world, and it's the sort of the LiDAR versus camera thing versus visual camera thing. We have portfolio companies in robotics, Andromeda primarily in Fund One. And obviously there's a whole lot of OpenCV and things like that that obviously happens in being able to do it. So those elements I think are interesting, but I sort of want to understand a little bit here about how it's different to the existing model, but we'll come back to it. Early proof, human inclusion over 90%. Okay, so okay, sure. So we've kind of proven on paper. An interesting way of thinking. Interesting. Okay, and an interesting way of thinking about the problem space. So I don't know how much I call it early proof, but okay, interesting. Now sort of curious to see where the applications, how that sequencing and timeline is going to come out. So we'll probably find out later in the deck. Okay, so now to the sim to real gap. So this is now coming back into the world of digital twin type stuff, which is also where I start going, oh, okay, interesting. The interesting part here will be the piece of where, okay, I think, again, this whole group sort of, I'm trying to think of how to explain this. There's a lot of pieces of where I look at all this stuff and I go, oh, interesting, interesting problem, interesting question, blah, blah, blah. But I haven't quite gotten the piece of where this early part truly fits into it. This part so far has given me the best idea of what you think you're going to do, but it still is a very broad space, right? A really broad space. So that's the part that to me a little bit is still a bit missing. We might be about to be find out. This is a nice 10-year. If we look at the 10-year piece, is the element of maybe this is the middle piece. But if you look at the 10-year piece of being able to say, hey, we need to be able to actually accurately, sort of simulate, all of these things that are very hard to accurately simulate because of, as you say, things like cyclists and choppers and things like that. That's an interesting problem. But that, I don't know if that's a 10-year, 2-year piece. And this is also an interesting question, right? So there's all this stuff I sort of go, lots of these bits are interesting, but I'm struggling to really see how they all quite fit together at this point. Which to me probably says it's probably an early stage company again. So that's I could end up finding out I'm very wrong in that context. But early stage and confusing slide decks, generally speaking, come together. So that's fine. That's my job. I jokingly say it's our job to tell the difference between a great company pitched, less well and a terrible company pitched amazingly. The Elizabeth Holmes problem, as I would call it. Or the Elon Musk problem, sometimes you would say as well. But so I don't mean that in a bad way. But we'll see if it is actually another such company. Why now? So the why now piece to me doesn't actually this is one of those ones of where I think. So some of the things sometimes as a founder, whether it's in a problem slide or otherwise, or it's typically in a problem slide, right? But this is a why now slide. But is you say the sort of thing that's already obvious, and sometimes you need to say the obvious thing, and sort of things like, we don't want our children to drown. Yeah, obviously we do not want our children to drown. Parents don't like their children drowning. So you sort of don't always need to say, let alone spend a whole slide on. You sort of want, let's say, 10 slides max, 6 to 8 is ideal for a read deck, right? And so the why now piece for me here is a bit taken as read. Everyone I think agrees that AI big, dealing with people hard, trust hard. We've seen that element, and again, this kind of can be part of this earlier problem piece of and where I think the narrative to me, we talk to founders a lot when we're doing these things of trying to shape up the narrative. And the narrative to me feels a little bit here we've seen the journey of self-driving cars, and that's been really hard. Talk to anyone in that world, and you realize how very, very hard it is. I mean, hell, even as a consumer, you get in one of the Waymos or whatever in San Francisco, and you think, oh wow, this is very genuinely quite impressive. So Tesla people could say the same thing at full self-driving. And I think the narrative that would help here, or the narrative that I'm thinking in my head, at least here, is this piece of we've done is the wrong word, but self-driving cars is kind of early application of this kind of world of trying to work out how to trust AI to be able to respond in near real time to these kinds of problems. And we're only just now getting there. Like you look at Waymo and it was started in 2006, I think, 2008, 10, 12. Like it's not a young company. And a lot of those companies are from that era. And that's, totally fine. Again, good company, big company. But I think that's where what's interesting for me here is trying to build that narrative into saying, and sort of, I guess, use that narrative to work out the piece of the reason we need this sort of company, spatiotemporal intelligence layer, is the piece of the self-driving car problem is, confined to roads in a way that, that's simple. Whereas then you look at all of the in-home humanoid, robots in aged care facilities, robots in hospitals, whatever, have their own set of edge cases and things to be able to handle. And how can we be the layer that actually reduces that timeline of how long it took us to get self-driving cars onto the road to a much shorter period. So I think that's to me at least where the narrative fits more in my head a little bit here. And I could be totally missing the narrative and story. So we'll find out if that's true or not. But I think to come back to this slide, the why now piece, that's where I think it's sort of like presenting the narrative that way makes the why now thing obvious, if that makes sense. Because then you sort of go, yeah, it makes sense that we're going to need to try and work out a way to do that in a shorter fashion than we have. So, technical vision, okay, team slide. Robotics, engineering, human machine turn to pencil. Okay, cool. Ops. Yeah, help me a bit more about what Matt's going to do. That's a bit of a thing. Alan Duffy. Hello, Alan. I know Alan. Cool. Interesting. Okay, so in the multimedia era now, that could mean 1996 or 2006. So good. And again, nice easy split to me because it's sort of 2 + 1. You could even put out a little bit over the other side, but I'll be it's pretty easy with 2 + 1. But obviously, early team, small team like that makes it clear. Give me a little bit more context on Matt's background would help. But yeah. And I like the little context at the bottom that you have, worked together before and things like that. That's also a helpful thing because we'll ask that to try and understand the strength of the co-founding relationship. How well, Alan is, useful, but I care more about how the co-founders work together because obviously co-founder breakups is one of the many things that kill companies that shouldn't have to kill companies. So indeed, we have to work those things out as every team. Okay, so here's our sort of what we'll do. So this is when we talk about the previous one, right? This is our kind of this is what we're getting in the short term, in the next 12 months, right? So I like this slide already because it's telling me that piece of what you think you're going to achieve in 12 months and what that looks like. So strengthen the wedge. Yeah, okay, that doesn't quite. That was the side I understood the most, but help me understand a bit more about what that means. We're still sort of, I guess it's a bit buzzwordy, if that makes sense. It's a bit a bit blurry in my head as to what exactly that part is. Improve behavior change is great. Okay, so we want to try and do do the simulation piece at a much bigger scale and demonstrate that. Okay, cool. Yeah, okay. I don't really understand or know what that means. Again, it's one of those tricky ones where you start getting a bit heavy. Benchmarks, yeah. Everyone loves a benchmark in AI. I think there is, again, an interesting question there of where that looks like and things like that. Okay, so this one to me feels a bit like we haven't quite, in my head, I haven't quite established where we are now, where we want to be, and then I kind of get the piece of the future horizons go beyond motion, right? And I get that part, I go, yep, okay, that makes sense. But you can see here that I still haven't quite worked out the piece of where the IP is, if that makes sense in this. So where's the capability coming from? So what are you unlocking that's different to the LiDAR in a vehicle or the video analytics solution or the blah blah blah? That's the part that I think to me hasn't quite come across here, and how you're thinking about that, and maybe part of that is like, again, could be the special sauce and therefore doesn't want to be in there. But like the motion into token, like kind of, I guess, in that context, it would help to unpack more about, and we have time, I think, for some Q&A, so you can try and do this on the call. It'd be really fun for everyone. Try and unpack a bit into the motion into tokens. It's a lovely marketing phrase. I really like that. But I think it's that piece of help me understand more about what a spatiotemporal model is to you, what it is on a technical basis, and things like that. It's a video. That also is going to make a difference. So this is another good lesson, right? When things get exported, presumably by Darren, to PDF and stuff like that, you lose some of this. It helps sometimes to have a little button somewhere that's like, see video, and link it to the YouTube in case someone does do that. So try and be aware that people will screenshot stuff or whatever. And you can, if you send us the link or whatever to the video, I can pull it up right now if you want. Or you can try and explain it. Either way, I love an explanation on call. It's a good question. And now you see the problem of the deep tech new solutions is how do you describe a new field of AI when you only have regular words? This is indeed the deep tech co-founders problem. So I'll finish this piece off. So that's the part that I think is in my head a bit missing here, right? And the video could explain it all. We could be about to unlock all of the understanding, and that might be magical, and I'll love that. But like, again, so like, I guess it's a delicate balance of where these read decks, the intent of them and the idea of them is to be able to try and make me curious enough to jump on a call. But I shouldn't be so confused that I go, I just don't understand what this is. And this is one of those ones that I go, it's sort of it's interesting enough that I would probably get, or one of us, there's 3 partners at Galileo. We're sort of effectively a partner-only firm. One of us would probably jump on a call to try and understand those questions of like, where does this fit? And, and that stuff, even just in the sense of like within that sort of sphere, it's always interesting to kind of understand that. We've done some DD on people trying to build, AI-based robots into amusement parks and stuff like that, which is all very Disney Imagineering kind of world stuff. And, very interesting kind of combination that we've seen out of Andromeda of how you deal with the software plus hardware integration layers and stuff like that. So, like in that sense, it's sort of like, I'd sort of pick up the call in the sense of saying, unpack this for me, help me understand where you see this fit and what are the trends that you're seeing that are driving that. Excellent. Okay, I'll open this video in a second. And so that would help, I think, more in the deck to be able to explain it. And we're going to watch the video together because it's going to be really fun. And I'll take or you can narrate it live if you would like. Actually, we can unmute you. You can narrate it live for the whole team. And then we'll go through the video. But to finish it off, the last piece. So no ask slide could be a good thing. It could be a bad thing. I don't know if that means that you're thinking of raising a round now. How big the round is. I know you don't have to know all the mechanics. Sometimes it's just about saying, what we're looking for. We want to raise X dollars for the next 12 months, and terms we can work it out, everything else. But I sort of want to know in that piece of where you see, what do you need to achieve this? And usually what do you need in the sense of people headcount? If we go back to Obadiah's good little pie chart, the people headcount is this bit, plus you could probably argue this bit, university researcher salaries and the founder salary, right? So like something like 60-ish%, 70% is usually in headcount. And I can kind of see vaguely the breakdown of how he's thinking about this: researcher salaries, software engineer, founder versus the researcher piece. So that's really all the main part, the most important part for me to know is in that ask piece is how much you think you need for that period, right? How much you think you need, how long that's for, and then how you're thinking of spending it. Because sometimes you see these earlier stage things of where like 80% in marketing, and you think to yourself, you don't have a product yet. It's pretty hard to spend 80% of your raise in marketing when you don't have a product yet. Versus, obviously early on, particularly in these more deep tech type solutions, it's mostly R&D, as you see from both of these. So, so that would help. But again, nice little easy finishing slide. Contact details, everything else. And I'm going to open this thing, and you're welcome to. I'm sure Darren can help us work out how to allow you to unmute. I'm just going to open this.
Would you like to call in, Andrew? If you click the
is he only on?
button.
Oh, he needs to.
Yeah, if he clicks call in on the audience
call
view,
in. Let's
I should
go.
be able to allow you to come join this conversation.
Let me just mute this. So there we go. I'll make it full screen, and then I'll share that screen.
Grayed out.
Show.
All right, let me try to fix that. Let's see.
Okay, how to make it.
I'll just go ahead and...
Now show it inside a regular window. Full screen has confused it. Sometimes having a Mac is a bit of a pain.
Yeah, I just got a new Mac. Anyway.
Cinema mode, that'll do.
Can you just try use that link, Andrew? I think you should be able to join as a guest via that link. Let me know how you go.
Maybe this one works.
How was it grayed out? Let's see.
Let's see if we can get Andrew on and we can hear the narration.
Yeah.
What was the motion? Yeah, stemming and things like that. Yes. Well, here, I'll play the video. I'll play the video first. If you can't jump on a narrator, I'll play the video. Go double narrator. It's a minute 30.
Sure.
Kinematic tokens is also a nice word. So it does need a narration because it looks a bit like a Star Wars thing. And I know I've muted it intentionally, so I haven't listened to the narration. So I guess my question here is the answer here that you're saying that you're translating the probability model of where an object can end up into a tokenized, sort of, I guess, vectorized, translatable space. Is that an accurate way to describe it? I probably am oversimplifying this problem. Yeah. So, from if I understand the video right, it sort of is the bit of the how you explain tokenize, how you tokenize the probability piece of where something will go. Yeah. And is the question, so I'm going to just ask questions to the chat for those who aren't unable to see the chat. So what AB has said here is here, I'll just stop this. So what AB said here is that LLMs have motion tokens, the lemmas or syllables that make up words, stemming and things like that. What you're looking for is what we're looking at in the video is the alphabet of how things move. Token 1, token 2. Motion is their primary data domain, not language, not pixels, and not images or pixels. In that sense, they're sensor agnostic, a foundation model for then asking questions of motions. And then he said, correct, as LLMs finish the next word, so too can we half know the next motion. So that's where it's like, the way I would explain that, that's where it's like, what we often do is try and explain it back to the founder in our own words to see if we actually understand what the hell we're talking about, is that piece of translating the probability of where something is going to go next into a tokenized space. That's how I would sort of describe the problem space, in the sense of, then I go, okay, cool. So I sort of understand the thing of, we need to be able to work out, and there is a world of, long story, but my grandfather was an astrophysicist and used the DSMC method to be able to do rarefied gas dynamic predictive models in primarily like how things move through the outer atmosphere. So I have a bit of mathematical knowledge about this, which is where it gets a bit confusing, maybe. Particularly on how heat then compounds on different surfaces and substrates. So kind of that's where my second motion intent understanding. Yeah, okay. So that's where I think I would say the simpler way, and again, this is the piece of my point of view. You should seek many and then see which ones make sense. But the way I'd be describing this to a simpleton like myself, a non-PhD person, is that element of where you're taking the probability / the simulation / whatever word you want to use to best describe that is accurate enough. And then, yes, correct, yes. This is the deep tech problem. My grandfather's an astrophysicist. I know this all too well. Try to explain the DSMC. Graham Bird, if you know who Graham Bird is, my grandfather. But anyway, so trying to explain that. But that's where I'd say you're taking that piece of how do we determine the probability of where an object will be and explain it to I guess an LLM / an AI model. AI model is an easy way to put it. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So I think that's actually really interesting. So to summarize, interesting thing, an interesting problem, right? And you can see how in these sort of situations it can be really hard on a deck to be able to try and explain that in a way that's going to make sense to the person. Because, like I said, it makes sense to me as a mathematical predicting, probability weighted solutions and then tokenizing them piece. That makes sense to me, and I hope it's sufficiently accurate to at least be directionally what you're seeking to do. But to a different person, it will be a totally different answer as to what will make sense to them. But that's where I think for that, what I would be saying / doing for that simpleton audience is doing that piece of the problem that we have is it's hard, it's easy to predict where an object will be if it continues its current course. But it's hard to explain to an AI model how that probability space works of what could happen next, which is kind of a probability weighted, that's sort of simulated probability weighted problem. Which your video does do a good job of explaining that, to be fair, with the context of how you described it. But that's how I would say it's an easier way to describe that problem solution space, is to be able to say, we have a model that translates that probability weighting of what will happen next to this object into a tokenized format that an AI model can understand. That'd be my nice little succinct wrapped version of this. That makes a bit more, or at least to me, it makes more sense. But I think that's it. It's one of those things where it's a deeply technical space, and I that I think is fairly obvious. But I think that's where you sort of got to keep testing that piece of how do you get the simpleton easier people to be able to wrap their heads around kind of the problem space, because irrespective of the explain like I'm 5 version, because you got to assume that the VC is really stupid, because most of us usually are in your world compared to you. We definitely are, and so and some will have deep domain expertise, and that's great. We will often ask those people who we know within our networks to be able to kind of logic check our own understanding of things, as well as you, obviously. But it's also that piece of where I need to make sure that, for example, when I take this to, maybe another way to think about it is, our process. Then I've got 3 minutes. That's right. I can wrap. Good thing to finish on. So the way that we have to do the deals essentially is we have to work out if the deal meets our mandate and our thesis and what the fund believes in and the strategy that our investors have told us to go and execute and stuff like that. And then we've got to try and work out, is this good? Is this not good? All that kind of stuff. But then we've got to then take it to our investment committee. So, different firms have different models of how they do that. But, sort of generally speaking, it's off a bit of paper that explains what the company is and the terms of the deal and all that stuff. And then you have to then present it to the investment committee as the manager, right? And that's usually a representative or a couple of representatives of your investors. And so I have to be able to explain this to them as well. So I have to be able to understand it myself, but then I have to be able to explain it to them. And they also have their own different sets of backgrounds, as well as do my other 2 partners. And this is where this sort of things start becoming really important. And then after that, I then also have to explain who you are to all of my investors. And my investors are in much broader space even then of their knowledge and everything like that. And so you've got to sort of remember a little bit that part of what I also have to be able to make sure I can do in every deal that we do, or VCs have to do in every deal we do, is I have to be able to explain it to all of those different stakeholder groups, as well as understand it myself. And so that process has to sort of, and again, often that does change and improve over time. Companies pivot, you get a better idea of how people respond to it on both sides realistically. But that's where I sort of go with this piece. It's sort of there'd be a lot of me going, does this make sense if I say it this way or this way or this way? And I'm doing that primarily, to get my own mental model of what you are and who you are and things, accurate and squared with who you are. But then secondly, because I know that then I'm going to spend a lot of my time both to, the partners on my team, to my investment committee, to my investors, having to then sort of explain those pieces of, who you are, because that's then how I have to be able to then say, this is why this fits our strategy or our mandate or things like that. So really interesting. And thank you both to both you and also Obadiah for submitting your decks. I know it's a bit of a, yes, correct. It is indeed. There's a million ways of explaining these things when you present them, and you can see the person's reaction and you can ask them what they understand about a space. It's very hard when it's on a deck, and that's where reading a deck can be really hard. Yeah. So that is indeed the challenge. But thank you for submitting your slides, because they're both very, very interesting sets of slides. I think both are interesting sets of lessons. Good luck. I'm always happy to answer any questions and things. But like I said, all I profess to do is give an opinion and perspective. I don't always presume it to be right.
Yeah, the themes sort of matched up with each other, so it was good that both of them came together, kind of get to discuss that deep tech problem of being able to get simpletons like myself.
Our first deal in the second fund is a deep tech thing, so
Okay.
like
Awesome. Love to see it. Yeah. Cool. Well, everyone, thank you so much for your time today. If you're interested in the next workshop that we're running one in the next week that's focusing on Notion. So obviously, if you've been following what we do here at Cremona Digital Hub, we've been working with Notion a lot on their new agents. So in order to leverage agents to their maximal effect, you need to have a really clean process and data for that agentic AI to be built upon. And that's exactly what we're going to be focusing in this workshop with Tim Jeffries, to build a really good MVP, if you will, for your workspace, and then naturally connect on to some agents after that. And we also have another in-person event coming up on May 12th, Singapore meets Melbourne. Unfortunately, we've already hit our capacity for that event, but there is a waitlist open. So if you'd like to sign up for that waitlist, we may or may not open up some new spots so you can come around and listen to 12 new founders from Singapore pitch their ideas. Okay. Thank you very much for.
Thanks, Darren. Thank you as always for the invitation.
Thanks, you. Thanks so much. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.